Hello, and welcome to the Journeys of Folco Hornblower, the One Ring 2nd Edition Strider Mode adventure, written and narrated by me, Ryan Hewlett. Book 2, Chapter 2. The sun barely rose over the hills of Shire when Folco woke up, and looking out the window, a slight fog blanketed the village of Brockenbores, making the area look all too eerie. Folco stretched, then gathered his belongings, and prepared a sizable breakfast for the morning. He walked out of the small boarding house he had been given for the night, dressed as he would for any hunt into the Chetwood. This would be a first, however, going far underground, into a mine, and again he questioned what he was doing. A tinge of regret came over him. But as the fog was being burnt off by the warm summer sun, and he panned over the mine site and the village proper, he knew something must be done to find out what was going on and get these people's lives back to some sense of normalcy. That, and he agreed to the work and reward he would receive when he came back. Finishing breakfast and walking outside, he saw Billy. Walking over and cutting a handful of grasses with Barrelak's knife, he hand-fed him and brushed his mane, head, and neck. "Billy, I'm going to have to do this one alone. Don't believe you'll take kindly to the mines. Besides, these are hobbit mines. I'm not sure you'll quite fit well." Folco paused, took in a deep breath of air, and continued. "Now listen to me good. If I'm not back out of this mine in a day or two, you head back to home, to Bree. You know the way, don't you, boy?" Billy nodded and neighed in agreement. After another few moments, Folco gave Billy a head nod, and bid him farewell and proceeded, spear, bow, and pack in hand. What would normally be a noisy, active place now was eerily silent. Only the footstep of Folco's bare feet walking on the dirt path to the mine entrance echoed throughout. Suddenly, from behind an old shed, Folco heard a whisper. "Psst! Over here! Over here!" Folco turned, and two, what would be unmistakably hobbit miners, waved to Folco to come over. The pair of hobbits were definitely not the most refined, clothes dirty and dusted from many days of underground work. Folco noted that they were nervous as well, and somewhat scared of something. One of them was constantly peering from around the corner, looking back and forth, almost as if waiting for something. The other continued to wave Folco towards. Come on, we haven't got all day." Folco tried what he could to garner if they were friend or foe, but considering the circumstances, he had no choice but to trust them, and it didn't look to hinder Folco's task so far. "Look, it's a great thing you're going down and checking the mines out, but we came to warn you about what's down there." The hobbit, now looking more nervous, peering behind Folco, side to side. Folco rested his spear and nodded for the hobbit to continue. "Well, you see, my partner and I have been down in the eastern mines most of our working lives, so we knows what's down there. Not much, just a bunch of crabby miners, rock, and that iron we bring out every day. Honest day's work. Well, one day, we's been open up a new tunnel. Old Goldworthy is wanting more and more iron brought out, right? So here, we and my partner behind me, just chipping away at the rock, and then all of a sudden, we break into something. Darkness, I tell you. Pure darkness. Barely the light of the lamps broke through it. The air was cold, damp, and it reeked of something out of the deepest pits. Oh, we ran, we did. We ran as fast as we could. Dreadful experience it was." The hobbit paused, shook his head, and took in a breath, continuing. "Well now, we goes and talks to old Goldworthy about what we saw and what happened. Said he'll take care of it. He told us not to tell anyone, so we hadn't, until now, telling you. You see, that's when all this started, all this fuss here in the mines. First it was Dudo, who came ill. Then it was Ismbold and Marmadas, who suffered those horrible leg injuries. And then Posco, the coughing spats he had. We can hear them through the north, south, and east mines. Then now poor Fastrit. Found him, they did, dead, somewhere in the north." Suddenly, the other hobbit on lookout interrupted. "Marek, let's get! Goldworthy is coming!" With that, the two rushed behind the building and out of sight. Folco turned and walked out into the center of the main path leading to the mine, and stopping, turned around to see Goldworthy, alone, walking towards him. "Ah, Mr. Hornblower, glad to have caught you before you headed in. Was hoping you hadn't left yet. Glad that you hadn't. Wanted to give you a brief overview of the mines." Goldworthy, gave a rundown on the mines, the north, south, and eastern tunnels. The east being the oldest, the north newest to be open, with new tunnels in each section being opened up all the time. Who knows which tunnels have opened up something we shouldn't have. The main entrance should have supplies available for you to take on your investigation. Picks, lanterns, rope, that sort of thing. So take whatever you think you need. The mines have been in use for some time, so they're quite extensive. Pack yourself some provisions. You may be down there a while. If you haven't returned by evening, I'll send in a crew to come in and find you. If any are willing to go in, of course. Best of luck, and thank you for your service. And with that, Goldworthy turned around, pipe in his mouth and one hand behind his back, walked slowly back towards the mine offices. Like most Hobbit architecture, the mine entrance was much the same. A large, round, heavy wooden door, iron bracing, hinges, and supports, looked much more of the same elegance of any smile main door in the Shire. The door didn't seem all that out of place to the rest of the hill either, carefully and meticulously built to blend into the hillside of the grass. The large door was closed, with a warning for none to enter unless on official business. Pulling on the large iron rings, Folco braced and pulled with all of his might, but none was needed. Perfectly balanced the door had been, and with surprisingly very little effort, Folco was able to open it, as if one was opening a pantry door. The light of the morning shone through into the large, dome staging area for the mine. Cabinets, tables, and racks for holding gear, jackets, and the like were all along the walls. The area was lit with large, oil-burning lamps, and off to what Folco thought was the north, south, and east directions were large tunnels into the darkness of the underground. Folco went to one of the cabinets, opened one, and found what he wanted: a coil of rope, lantern, and some oil. Folco stood and looked at each of the tunnels. "Well, Folco, this is it. Better hop to it, no time to waste," he said to himself. Lantern in one hand, spear in the other, bow at the ready across his back, Folco first started with the north tunnels, where the unfortunate Fastrid was found lifeless. Unlike the large staging area, the tunnels were much smaller, larger than the halls in Bag End or Brandy Hall, mind you, but small enough that only 2 or 3 hobbits, maybe 2 dwarves, could easily fit through. Anyone larger than a dwarf would have to almost crawl to get through, as the ceiling height hasn't that much taller than Folco's spear. Folco was unsure of the time he spent so far exploring the northern mines, but checking the lantern he noticed he burnt through 1/3 of the oil. He hadn't noticed much out of place in the maze of excavated tunnels. Entering what looked to be a new section of the mine, he stopped for a quick rest, a bite from some biscuits and dried meat he had taken along, and dimmed the lantern to conserve on its fuel. Out of the corner of his eye, down the long tunnel of this newly worked rock, he noticed a slight, green-bluish light emanating from down the way. He hadn't noticed it until now, until after dimming the lantern. Folco paused to listen, no sound he had heard. Finishing up his snack, he turned the lamp up just enough to see a little better, but still keeping the green-blue light visible. Holding his spear at the ready, the lantern in the other hand, he carefully and quietly proceeded down the tunnel. He wasn't far down from where he had rested before the tunnel opened up into a massive, naturally made cavern, damp and fairly warm, as compared to the rest of the tunnels so far. Folco set down the lantern behind him, and with his body blocking the lamplight, the cavern glowed the green light all around. On the floor and along the lower halls of the cavern, Folco could see what appeared to be half-circular shaped globs all around. Turning and grabbing the lantern, he turned up the light and now could see more easily what those globs were. Mushrooms thrived here, it seems, and were of a variety unfamiliar to Folco, and he's quite sure unfamiliar to most hobbits. Folco, not proceeding any further, decided to step back. He stepped back, and unfortunately his foot brushed up against a smaller mushroom near him, and in doing so a small puff of what Folco could only think were spores spewed out. Folco quickly started to cough, not severely, but enough that he quickly covered his mouth and ran back down into the relative safety of the mine tunnel. Folco coughed, spit, and rinsed his mouth out with some fresh water from his water skin. As he was securing the water skin in his pack, Folco noticed what looked like an eaten stem of a mushroom on the tunnel floor. Looks eaten. I'd say that poor hobbit tried to eat one of those. Was always told not to eat a mushroom. You weren't sure what it was? Guess someone never told old Fastrid that, Folco said under his breath. He proceeded back to the shaft entrance, and as best he could, with his spear hand, engraved on the tunnel wall, "Danger, do not enter." But the mushrooms didn't explain all of what happened that the two informants had told Folco earlier that day, and really didn't seem to fit the description they had of the tunnel and cavern they opened up as well. Although Folco felt sickly, and the mushrooms seemed really out of place, he didn't sense the dread nor darkness the two had said they had felt. Folco proceeded through the northern mines and seemed to have entered another different section. One he could only think of was the eastern set of tunnels of the mine, as the rock looked to have been chipped and chiseled at an earlier time of the mine. Proceeding again through the labyrinth of tunnels, similar in size and feel as the northern ones, Folco turned around the corner into a larger, longer, and straighter tunnel. Off into the distance, and the light of the day shone. Walking down, he found himself in the main staging area of the mine. It was just past midday, and Folco, finding not a better time than now, sat and had a lunch and replenished the fuel for his lantern. A slight nudging in his mind told him to grab a torch, and he listened. Who knows how long he'll be down here, and having a second source of light wouldn't be a bad thing. Folco now entered into the southern mines, and like the northern and eastern tunnels so far, the look and feel were much the same. He proceeded through the network of tunnels until coming into what he had thought again was the eastern tunnels, however, in a different location than he had entered from on the north side. This section looked to be newer in excavation, and he proceeded down what Folco thought was a much more recent tunnel. As he proceeded, small excavations were on either side, but not very deep. And he continued straight down, and as he approached a bend in the tunnel, an intense feeling of darkness and dread washed over him. The rock was a darker, shadowy color, he noted, and even the light from the lamp seemed duller, less vibrant. The shadows cast by the lantern light seemed longer, and almost if they had moved ever so slightly, eerily. Folco chalked it up to his mind playing tricks. He clenched his hand around the spear, however, just a little bit harder, and walked on, shaking off the feeling of dread as his spirits, and moved forward. Walking, ever so silently, his years under the tutelage of his grandfather as they hunted in the forests of the Chetwood coming to great use, Folco dimmed his lantern light just enough to see shapes and the outlines of the opening at the far end of the cavern. Folco laid the lamp down and clutched the spear with both his hands, and inched his way forward, his eyes now adjusting to the diminished light. He could see a little further into the darkness. The tunnel opened up to a large dome cavern. Stalagmites rose from the floor, stalactites similarly reaching down from above. The faint dripping of water echoed throughout, and besides the shallow breathing of Folco, nothing else could be heard. Folco quietly moved and picked up the lantern to shed more light within the cavern. To the far end, directly across, Folco could see another large opening that remained dark. Folco couldn't see what was beyond. To the right and left, Folco could see somewhat into other openings, each seemingly opening up into another separate cavern-like chambers. Folco proceeded to the left side first, setting the lamp just outside the entrance of this opening, the light exposing more of the inside. Folco's eyes widened to what he had saw, and as he stepped just into the opening, littered on the floor of the chamber was countless bones of various sizes and shapes, skulls of various creatures, leg bones, rib cages all strewn throughout. Covering it all was a thickened web-like strands crisscrossing all over the chamber, Folco being all too careful not to touch. Folco then felt another wave of dread wash over him. Not wanting but forcing himself, he looked up. The lamplight wasn't enough to fully expose what he saw, but just enough to get the size, the shape, and the outline of what it was. This nameless thing was larger and more terrifying a thing he'd ever seen. Not even his wildest nightmares or scariest of stories he had heard could describe it. Even the savage, ravenous, wolf-like beasts of the old forest had not compared. 8 large and long legs protruded from the center of a large, bulbous body, wrapped around a large central stalactite. A large, round sack-like protrusion made up its end. A duo of long, thick, protruding fangs fell from what Folco could only think was its mouth, dangling freely from its body. The creature was large, larger than some of the buildings he's encountered in the Shire, but an encouraging thought crossed his mind. There's no way that thing could fit into the mines proper. Folco also realized the creature was seemingly asleep and unawares of its presence. Fortune seemed to favor Folco this day. Not wanting to spend any more time than he had to, he carefully and ever so quietly, ensuring not to step on anything to make a sound, inched his way back into the main cavern. What was this creature? He's not sure anyone knows, But one thing was for sure, this tunnel must be sealed off and never to be opened again. Falco's curiosity did, however, stop him from returning and heading back to the surface. He wondered what was in the other chamber opposite the creature's lair. Folco looked, and to his amazement, large, cocooned, with a web-like substance were large, elongated structures attached to the stalagmites on the chamber floor, or dangling from the stalactites from the ceiling. Folco took out his knife and cut into one of them. The web-like structure was dry and firm to cut, but the knife was sharp and made easy work of it. Ripping it open, Folco came face to face with a half-preserved but long-dead goblin. He opened another, this time a man, the next an orc. The horrid creature seemed to not care for what it ate as long as it ate. One thing it didn't seem to care for was things made of metal, precious metals or the like. Littered throughout were coins, precious stones, some rusty swords, daggers, and spears, and half-rotted bows. "What is this?" Folco whispered. Something caught his eye, and just with the flickering of the lamplight behind, Folco noticed a glimmer under one of the hanging cocoon sacks. Carefully making his way over, he spotted and picked up a ring, a very fine ring, made of what appeared to be a silvery-like metal. He couldn't pick out the markings on the ring. There just wasn't enough light, but he could feel for them. Without thought or warning, he put it on, and suddenly a wave of darkness came over him, as if the shadows cast from the light of the lantern and the darkness in the cavern chamber reached out and pulled at his heart and his very soul. Folco took a step back and tried to shake off the dreariness that had befallen him, but he seemed not to be able to. He took off the ring, however the darkness remained within him. He put it back on, and whatever the effect, it seemed not to get any worse. Either way, it was a very nice ring, he had thought. For why wouldn't he keep it? Better he to have it than the creature in the other chamber. Not wanting to tarry any longer, he was able to pocket a number of small gems, some of the coins with him, securing them in his pack, careful to not make any noise. He proceeded back into the east tunnels. The quiet of the tunnels which he had experienced so far was broken by the hurried clanking of metal on rock. He pondered what could be happening. Had he spent that much time in the mines, and Goldworthy now had sent in a search party? What was couldn't have been further from the truth. Rounding the corner of the tunnel was Goldworthy himself, pick in hand, hurriedly chipping and digging into the supports of the tunnel walls and ceiling. Folco stopped and shouted, "Goldworthy!" Goldworthy stopped and looked to see Folco. "I'm sorry. It must be done." And with that, he swung the pick against the wood support, causing it to buckle and give way to the weight of the surrounding rock. Folco yelled, "No!" as the walls of the tunnel started to give away, and suddenly between both Goldworthy and Folco, the ceiling caved in and closed off the tunnel. The resulting wave of debris and dust blew out the lantern. The noise of the falling rock echoed, and the floor, walls, and ceiling all shuddered from the collapse. Folco relit the lantern, and looking at the pile now before him, he slowly turned back towards the chamber with the Nameless Thing, and realized his way out was somewhere that way. Figuring time was not on his side, and the resulting collapse surely would have woken up the creature, he sprinted as fast as he could towards the chamber and to the other side he had not yet explored. Hopefully his instincts were right, and that it was a path out to the surface, somewhere, but he couldn't be for sure. He also was sure he couldn't stand toe-to-toe with that beast, so it was a chance he was willing to take to head down into the dark unknown. As he entered the chamber, just as he made it to the middle of the chamber, the creature crawled out from its lair and onto the ceiling between the stalactites to block the way to the other side. Folco's spear, already at the ready, threw it in an attempt to hinder the creature, but it harmlessly bounced off its bulbous body and down, bouncing on the cavern floor. Folco ran towards the far side, and readying his bow and nocking an arrow, aimed as best as he could on the run, and let release the arrow. Struck true to the arrow it did, seemingly hindering the movement of one of the creature's front legs. Folco took the slight opportunity, rolled, and bolted under its large frame, and proceeded towards the far entrance into the darkened tunnel. The creature with one of its forward two legs reached out to grab at Folco. One struck true. A sharp, stabbing pain now radiated through Folco's left shoulder blade, Folco crying out in pain. Fortunately, his toughened leather shirt held true, otherwise the strike would have resulted in a deep puncture wound, if not worse. The second leg tried to wrap around Folco. However, the arrow which he had shot just a moment before, hindered the creature's ability to grasp at Folco, and he was able to break away without much effort, escaping into the tunnel. For whatever reason, the creature didn't follow, and Folco wasn't going to question why. He ran as fast and as far as he could before the oil of the lamp started to dim and flicker, signaling the oil was almost out. Folco quickly looked for a smooth place to rest, finding a spot behind a large outcropping. As he sat, the last of the oil burned out, and the light from the wick slowly faded and darkness overcame the lone hobbit. It was the darkest of dark that Folco now found himself. Cold, damp, the underground air now chilling through his bones. As he slowly succumbed to the fatigue of the day's events, he wondered how Billy, his trusted pony, was faring, and if he was faring better than he was. We'll continue the journeys of Folco Hornblower next time. If you like the story and the content I'm creating, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Check out the other videos I'm creating called Riddles in the Dark, as I attempt to learn and describe the rules of the One Ring RPG for new players and old of the game. Again, thank you for watching. Cheers.